Hi, I'm Sandra Raisin.
Owen Dutton.
My name is David Franklin.
Timothy Will.
Michael S. Martin, Michael Stephen Martin.
Yeah, so on May 27, 2018, I received a call that Frederick Avenue was under water. And so immediately, being the pastor of Miracle City, decided to get in contact with individuals that are part of our congregation and part of our community to see exactly what was going on. And unfortunately, it was far worse than we expected. And there were several community members whose homes were flooded, and the street had washed away cars, and it was quite an unexpected mess that took quite a bit of work to address.
That was the biggest flood that comes to mind because before that, my home never really flooded. But I was out that day, and when I got home, finally, because all the roadways were blocked trying to get here, when I got home, I was hoping that my sump pumps had worked. And they were working overtime because when I pulled up, I could see the water spewing out of them. However, when I went to the basement was flooded up to about my thigh.
We tried our best to get the car out of the way, but actually the flood surprised us. And every time it come down, the water would recede a little bit. We'd think about it again, but they called it a rain train. I believe it was either 8 or 12 inches fell in a 2-hour period. And it was just waves of continual rain come and would bring the water back up. This was the deepest flood I can think of. We own a 2008 Honda Ridgeline pickup, and the water came over the back tailgate of the pickup and filled the body 5 times. That's highly unusual, highly unusual.
Yes, the flood. Me and my wife, we moved 5117 in 1983. The following year, in 84, the flood happened. At that time, we were unaware of this being a flood area. So one morning as I was going out to work, it was raining hard, so the water levels were rising. Cynthia, her name is, the water's rising pretty high. So, and she said, you're just imagining things. So I said, no, look, the water's coming up past the curb. She said, oh. So I grabbed my keys. At that time we had 2 cars. I had an 83 Jetta and she had a 78 Volvo. I tried to put my 83 Jetta up on the church lot, at which time the floodwaters had stalled it. But then I got it up to the church lot. So, put it on the church lot, went through the waters, which was getting high. It was at that time at my thigh. So I said, oh my Lord. I got into my wife's car, turned it on, tried to put her car up on the church lot, at which time the waters took it away. The waters took the car from 5117 where I lived at, down to Beachfield Elementary School where the fire department rescued me from the top of the roof. So at that time I was a police officer for the county. So they said, hey, we have a call up the street at Chadworth. Hop on back. I said, oh man. So I'm on the back of the hook and ladder truck, proceeding up Frederick Avenue, at which time there was a lady that was trapped in her car. The water had trapped her car to the street side. She was pregnant. So at that time, the fire department shot a line to her car. At that time, we were telling her to remain calm. We're going to rescue you. The water levels were right at her chest. We shot a line to her. At that time, the firefighter was getting ready to retire. That was his last assignment. Fell off the back of the hook and ladder truck. I rescued him, grabbing him by the back of his shirt. Secured him. The line that we shot, I was holding on to the line. The rushing waters were still coming down, at which time I rescued her from the car, and I got a citation from the agency at that time, which was Baltimore County, for rescuing the lady.
Well, I know about other floods that happened prior to 2018, but that's the one that occurred after I became pastor of Still Meadow. And so that was, as I'm sure everybody knows, the Memorial Day weekend. When everything happened, I started getting calls, because then I was living a little further away, and so I started getting calls, and by that, and I think that was actually Memorial Day by then, and so I had a hard time getting here. So I'm going literally through back alleys, and things are washed away, and there's debris everywhere. I ended up with 3 flat tires. They got slashed in all of the debris by the time, a little bit after I got here. But anyway, I got to the church then, and then, we started surveying problems and challenges, and people were just starting to come out of their homes up and down Frederick Avenue and talking and interacting with each other. And so, as I remember, I got a vehicle, and I was able to make my way up to Edmondson Avenue, and we just bought a bunch of, again, remember it's Memorial Day, we just bought not tons, but bunches of food and buns and hamburger meat and all this other stuff, because it's like, okay, well, what can we do now? Which is always a good question to ask yourself in an emergency. What we could do now is feed people, right? And so some people from the neighborhood came on, we set up some grills, and as people processed their shock and their terror, and started telling each other their stories, they did it over hamburgers and hot dogs and Utz chips.
It's important to me because of the automobiles. We have never taken floodwater in my home. However, I know directly behind you, these people right here behind you, right this instant, have taken water into their basements. The next block down, that would be, I think the 4900 block maybe, because I'm 51. Those people have taken a lot of water in. And then the apartments. All those basement apartments should have never been built. We played football on that field before they built that joint. Okay, so, it was a nice cut field so the kids could play. Then they put up some apartments. They should have never put basement apartments because the floods terminate at Beachfield. That's the lowest point here, and it re-enters back into Maiden Choice Run. So the houses just below them get some, but principally it goes down the alleyways and behind those houses at the traffic light at Beachfield Avenue.
As I came to understand it, these are 100-year floods. And so over the last, 15, 20-ish years, it's become clear that term, that nomenclature is no longer appropriate. They're occurring every 15, 10 years, etc. Even that summer, in May, we ended up with 2 more, less severe, but very specific floods. And so we had 3 flash floods in the summer of 2018. So the fact that it's happening more frequently, the fact that it's happening in the city limits of Charm City, of our city of Baltimore, makes it hugely important because for the weeks and months after that flood, and as much damage as it did, there was close to 150 homes impacted, and something around 2,000 individuals deeply impacted by all of this. The people in Baltimore and around Baltimore, for the most part, if you weren't on Frederick Avenue or you weren't kin to somebody on Frederick Avenue, you only knew about Ellicott City, which is in Howard County. Which is at the other end of Frederick Avenue, by the way. You only thought of this whole calamity in terms of us calling it the Ellicott City flood. So it's important to me because from a environmental justice perspective, we've got to open our eyes and do a better job at understanding how things like climate warming and the flow of water, the quality of water, all of that, how it impacts our cities, not just our suburbs, not just certain areas, but our whole city. And people who seem to be perpetually less represented are being inextricably impacted by what's happening with our climate.
I think reducing flood risk is important because it impacts lives. If we don't continue to address the issues surrounding flooding and the larger issues surrounding climate change, which I believe the two are connected, we're literally talking about continued events, catastrophic events that negatively impact our community right here along the Frederick Avenue corridor, but also across the city of Baltimore, and then obviously larger with climate change all over the world.
I always had a sump pump, but I installed a second sump pump. We graded the area, trying to make sure that water doesn't rise. And if there's any heavy rainfall, my neighbors can attest to this, they will see me out there cleaning out all the drains, even in the rain. Because, people have said, why don't you wait for the city to clean the drain? Well, the city is not going to be flooded, but I will be. So once it rains and the debris comes down off the hills, I go out and I clean the drains. And that's just a part of me. It's not just because it's my house, it's because it's everyone's house. Several people that I know have had floods often. I've only had the one really bad flood.
Besides moving my car, because like I say, we've never taken water into our house. Whenever we hear the word summer thunderstorms, the cars go up here in the church lot. They go to high ground. Well, I'd rather walk across the street and get a car that runs than run out in the street and get one that's sinking. Okay, that's not happening. At our home in particular, the little things I can do is try not to get the trash in the storm drains or the storm grates and the leaves and all. Try to keep the leaves out of there to keep it flowing and down there. Try not to have debris and crap out or stuff out in my alley. Stuff out in my alley that can impede rain runoff. Our yard, we try and keep that as debris free as we can and keep it in as much grass area as we can and not hard surface area. With the thing I see in the neighborhood is if people are rehabbing their house, they're building a parking pad in the backyard. This again takes away, it's not a big area, not for a car, but it's taking away grass that can catch rain and can slowly filter through. I'm noticing more and more and more of the houses have had to go, like myself, to sump pumps because the ground is saturated. And the houses not behind you right now, but behind me, there's springs under us. If you go behind the 5100 block of Stafford, the odd side of Stafford, you will see water coming out of the hillside from springs that have been here all my life. But you can walk up there any old time you want. If you go right here to the cross street, can't think of this cross street, and you walk up the alley that comes down to the slope, dead of summer, dead of drought, water's running down it because of the springs. They've always been there.
Yeah, so one of the things that we did as a church community was, and something that we're still doing, is trying to ensure that we are limiting the water runoff from our property down along the corridor. So we've done like a greening survey. We have worked to improve, make some of our surfaces more porous, so that it can absorb the water rather than the water running off. We have a large parking lot, and that is a problem at times. It's a contributor. So we've done some things to make it more porous, and we have some plans to improve that work. In addition to that, one of the things that we've really focused on, and we did this right after the flood, was to try to help families.
We talk with great enthusiasm, and we have been since the last flood, to our elected officials, to staff people and departments in our city. The step is we will not be forgotten. We will not experience another cataclysmic event that is paralleled by another county, and where all the attention goes to that county, and we as a principality and as a municipality, I should say, are not paying attention to our own people. So that is really the first thing we have taken to, people showed up the day after, the week after, even for a month or so after the flooding, and as it reoccurred. It's much like, if I have enough time to give an analogy, it's much like a funeral. There's no problem with getting people to come to the funeral and to express their regret and mourn with you, etc. And so the family has that support. But I'm always interested in what happens 3 weeks from the funeral, right? Everybody else is kind of going back to their normal life. And here you have this family still struggling with the loss of their patriarch or their matriarch or whoever, or their child, right? And so in the same respect, what we are doing, it takes a lot of different avenues, but what we're doing is making sure that we conduct ourselves as a city that is mature and that we don't forget. So there's a lot of education going on now and preparatory stuff, right? And thinking systemically about how do we change water flow, how do we put in barriers, how do we think about, just a bunch of different things. And so staying on our folks and saying, thank you for coming when this was happening, but we want to know what you're going to do a year later. That's kind of what we're doing.
I think this experience has changed our daily activities primarily because it makes us more sensitive and aware of these issues, that all of us contribute to the realities that cause flood events and other natural disasters. And so we all have a role to play. We all can make a difference and change our behaviors to ensure that we're reducing the likelihood of floods and other natural disasters.
I listen to the weather a lot more than most people. I keep an eye to the sky a lot more than most people. We have, I guess it was maybe 2 months ago, some of the neighbors actually called me and said, is the church ease the restrictions on us parking because we're all scared? And I said, I don't know, but I don't think they're going to do anything to us. All right, no offense, but I don't think they're going to do anything to us. We've tried to get, through with we want to work with the church. You need to know who's in your lot. And we had 15 years ago, there was a guy parking a dump truck and the diesel fuel would leak on your lot. And diesel fuel will lift that blacktop. I drove a truck for 38 years for this company. Diesel fuel will eat that blacktop up and the stuff will leak on your parking lot. We can't have that. We can't have that. So you have every right in this world, but guys, we need high ground too. Plus in snow emergency, you're a blessing.
I just pay attention to it. I am concerned whenever I hear about flood watch, flood warning, a hurricane coming through no matter where, because we are always susceptible to rains, and heavy rains cause us to have floods.
Since the flood of '84, there has been several flooding. So it's just a reoccurring situation because it's a flood area. And that's just the direction of the waters coming. And when new neighbors move in, I always tell them, hey, this is a flood area. Just be mindful of, water's getting into your house and possibly your car's getting destroyed. And there's been neighbors that have had water damage to their cars from previous floods.
A guy named Rodney telling me about the experience he and his grandson had during the flood. So they're over here at what's called Frederick Manor apartment complex. So it's like, it's a long stretch of apartments, apartment housing, and it's only about 3 levels. But then there's a basement level, which at the last flood in the 90s had been, because we're in a flood zone, had been barred from taking in people. You could ask the question, because if we're a flood zone, we've been a flood zone. So the question that is begged is, why did they ever approve them building a sub-level, housing? So anyway, so they're down there, him and his grandson. And so, granddads, we play with our kids, our grandkids, and so he's just, he knows it's raining, but he's doing something, back is turned to the window, and because you can still, there's a little window thing, even though it's sort of his basement. And the grandson is like, Granddad, we in an aquarium. It's like we in an aquarium. And he's like, oh boy, be quiet, and it just keep going back and forth. And so something about the urgency of the boy hits him, and he just kind of turns around and he sees that water is doing this to the window that they have. And he realizes the predicament that they're in. They're being flooded. So he grabs the grandson, don't grab nothing else, grabs the grandson, goes to the door of their apartment, opens the door, water comes rushing in. He's able to pick him up and go up the stairs to the next level and knock on somebody's door, and they were kind enough to let them in. But hearing him tell that story, and he's telling me that story, within a few days of all of this, and you can still hear the terror in his voice. And you can still hear the trauma, thinking about not only his own life, but it sounded way more important to him that his grandson could have gotten drowned in Baltimore, not at the lake, not in Drew Hill Park, but in the apartment. So that's that's one of the things that's quite memorable to me.
The bad, of course, is coming home and finding a basement filled with water, and looking at a lot of the things that were totally destroyed, but they were things. So on the other hand, our community has grown together and are largely impacted by the church, Still Meadow Church, because they have been the rock. They set up headquarters for American, what is that? Yeah, Red Cross. They set up as a hub for Red Cross, and Red Cross worked out of here for months, giving us information, helping us get some funds available. And this church fed the neighborhood for months. Every day we could come over here. If your house was you were not able to access your home or to get something, there was food and a smile here and lots of love. And they have worked very diligently in the neighborhood, even today.
It doesn't have to do with the flood per se. It has to do with the darn car that they rented for me. Because I own a pickup truck. They got me this monster dually pickup truck thing that I wasn't driving nowhere. All right, we took my wife's back because she has the other car. So when we took hers back, it had, I don't know, 238, 250 miles. Mine had 8, because I wasn't driving it. That was a waste of money. I hate that. I hate wasting money. But it just reinforced that, put it on high ground.
There's actually a picture of the memory that really stands out to me from the Frederick Avenue flood, and that is when a woman had to be rescued off of the MTA bus. Literally, they had to get a raft and get her off the bus, and I mean, they're floating her down Frederick Avenue, and it was just, I mean, it was a sight to see. And then you balance that with, I think, again, the resilience of the community, this ability to say, hey, we're gonna work together to resolve this issue. And so I think there's probably 2 memories. I think the first memory is the young lady who had to be rescued off the MTA bus. And then the second memory is that next weekend, the group of community members that came out to help folks clean up their residence and band together to make sure we could recover after this flood. So I think it was tragic, but then it was also great to see the community come together to help solve the problems that we faced.
Well, when I first moved here, we weren't required to have flood insurance. Then as the years went about, you had to get flood insurance. So when you acquired your mortgage, now you have to have flood insurance, but then I wasn't aware of having to have flood insurance. We weren't required to have flood insurance. Me individually, well, what you could do is make sure that the drains are free of debris. And my personal opinion, this area is a flood area, and when it rains, it's God's doings. So when you see the waters rushing in like that, you just pray and hope that it's not any reoccurring situations.
It's good to be a survivor, but if they would do some work on what needs to be done to prevent another flood, or hurricanes come through every year, and also anyone who lives here knows that this the land here, there's water, and we have an issue of houses sinking. All of that needs to be addressed. And all of it really is probably a part of the water problem.
Just that I don't know what we can do about it. We as people, yourself, myself, the ladies over there, we need to stop throwing trash on the ground because it makes its way to the storm drain and it clogs it. I see too many people walk by with a McDonald's thing, throw it out on the ground, get out of their car and throw the trash bag on the ground. I see too much of that. I hate that, all right? The amount of drainage area, we can't change that. It drains from over by Social Security Administration building in Woodlawn all the way down to that 4x8 hole, and everything's got to go through that hole. I don't believe you guys have the responsibility to continually clear back the banks to keep the fallen trees out of there. But I think that would be a help. And what I asked emergency management, and I see it out in Ellicott City, why can't we get a siren that when the water hits a certain height, let's just say up on my knee, that still ain't high enough to clog that culvert, that the siren goes off and lets us know, get your car out the street. Simple as that. The man told me at that time that they're trying to avoid that because your generation is not geared to my generation of listening for a siren and doing something. I grew up with air raid sirens, right, which went off every day at 1 o'clock, every Monday, to alert you to problems that could be coming. And that was the way they tested them. I don't know how they can work in other communities, yet they can't work here. He said they prefer to have the cell phone alert, which, gentlemen, I don't have a cell phone. And besides that, if I'm sound asleep, my cell phone's downstairs charging, my chance of hearing it go buzz are really slow. Okay, so, but a siren outside works for Arbutus Volunteer Fire Company, and them guys still come running. Works for Woodlawn Volunteer Fire Company. But it can't work here on Frederick Avenue? I don't understand that. I really don't. The response that they had at that time with the flood, and I mean, that took the road away and everything. That's the first time it ever took a road away. And the amount of debris and all that collected down here for the poor apartment people, I feel for them. I think they're renting them darn apartments again. So I feel for them. However, I sure wouldn't want to live in one of them. This was the most debris I've ever seen to take the street away. It was unbelievable. They had to come and tear it up and mill it. I like some of the improvements they made, fixing all the sidewalks and all, but up at the top of the 5100 block, putting a barrier at that first house has channeled more water down the back alleys. We can see it. You can look out the back window when it rains. You can see how deep it gets. That's not good. However, I guess that's what they had to do. I don't think the church can do much of anything to help mitigate the problem. I really don't. But I'm thankful you guys got that parking lot and let me get in there.
It is just all of it. For me personally, it has been one of the greatest gifts that I've gotten in my time in ministry. And here's what I mean by this. When I came here talking about stewardship, right? How to best, we house, Still Meadow is housed in a glorious building. And so how to make good stewardship of this building. Then when I came to understand what it really meant to be on 10 acres of land and for it to be a forest that we've now turned into instead of it being woods or just a forest, it's now Still Meadow Peace Park. And so, doing stewardship over that whole 10 acres and making it available to the community. And so when I came here, one of the things we talked about was how do we turn outward and not just be this little cluster of people that have church on Sundays and prayer meetings, but how do we serve our community? And the flood, so we were talking our way through that and the challenges of changing our attitude, I guess, our perspective. And we like to talk about it like this, that the flood hurried up that process, because all of a sudden the flooding brought the people to us. So all of a sudden they're in the parking lot of the church, they're in the fellowship hall of the church, they're meeting state and local officials in the fellowship hall. They're finding resources here. So it changed, it helped mature, I guess, our overall approach to what ministry is and what it means to have the privilege of being one of several anchor churches in a community. That just having church on Sunday is not enough. Having mercy on Tuesday, having availability on Thursday is important.
Well, I think my parting words would be is that we all have a work to do. And as we are committed to do our parts both individually and as organizations, so churches and nonprofits and businesses along the corridor, as we are all committed to play our role, I think then we collectively can have an impact, both from limiting the impact of the flood from our behaviors and advocating to our local government to ensure they're doing their part to support us in our efforts to limit floods from happening and then limit the impacts that floods can have on our communities.